Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Let's see. Once again, this is wrong. So let me go in here and fix this. This is where you can go to get today's soundtrack. Let's see if I can find it. Quantum. There it is. So, scientificsounds.com, quantum gravity. That's where you can go to get today's soundtrack. And here's where you can go to ask a question or make a comment on anything that we've covered in these live streams. There's quite a few. I think today is number 78 or 79. This is where you can go to see all the live streams that we've done so far. It goes back to last year, starting in April, 1 month after the pandemic closed the world down. And I began doing these live streams in the beginning as a way of helping de-stress people, because people under a lot of stress go into a fight or flight response, which dismantles the immune response. Can't have that during a pandemic, right? For those of you who are new, we use headphones. I play a soundtrack at the end to do a sort of a global mind link with everyone. The live streams build on information from the live streams before, so if you're new, I'll be making reference to previous live streams where I've covered certain concepts that I'll talk about today. It's quite a task to go all the way back to watch all of them, but each one of them lasts for about an hour. There's no reason why you couldn't watch one during the middle of the week. It's quite a journey to go through all these live streams. There's a lot of information there, most of which you've probably never heard before. Back in the 1920s, the first mystic to come over was this guy, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, who brought back just sort of mind-boggling secrets, esoteric secrets from the East, from secret monasteries and brotherhoods that had been operating for thousands of years. Secret information nobody had heard of. An integration of all kinds of different secret information repackaged perfectly for the Western mind. Incredible diagrams and mathematical information that wove together all kinds of things that esoteric organizations in Europe and some in the US had been tinkering around the edges of. Gurdjieff's information sort of took all of that and more that people had never heard of before and linked it all together in a scientific way that sort of blew everybody's mind. He became the cause célèbre in Europe and centered himself in France and had the top intelligentsia of all of Europe following what he was doing. Came over with these diagrams, this one in particular, the Enneagram, with secret mathematical formulas of this idea of 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7 in an infinite loop. And 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7 had really magical sort of mathematical properties. If you divide 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7 by each of the numbers of 1, 2, 4, 8, 5, 7, it equals 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, starting at a different number. this became the foundation for a whole sort of psychological cosmology, a new form of numerology where there are 9 personality types, linked heavily with numerology, where 1 and 2 are opposite personality types, and 4 and 5, and 7 and 8. But the 3, 6, 9 was special. This concept of the law of 3 and the numbers of 3, 6, 9, which came from these secret brotherhoods from the East, had all kinds of ramifications in cosmology and esoteric science and stuff like that. Fascinating stuff. His integration of the 2 great laws that he discussed at great length, the law of 3 and the law of 7, the foundations of everything in the universe. And we see that reflected more and more when that I dig into quantum physics, more and more of what Gurdjieff had talked about in his books, that many of us thought perhaps might be allegory, turn out over and over again to not be allegory at all, but to be the real thing. He wrote 3 books. This was the first book, All on Everything. Quite a thick book. And it's got, that's Gurdjieff. It's got quite a table of contents, page after page after page of, and it's all written in a bizarre sort of format of a allegorical, metaphorical, esoteric science fiction story, where, because the subtitle is Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, so the general format is your Beelzebub, the right hand of Satan, who've been thrown out of heaven and banished to the farthest, most desolate, darkest corners of creation, where they've been exiled. And Beelzebub, who's on this spaceship with his entourage and his grandson, has been telling his grandson all of these tales of his banishment and what he did with his time in his banishment. Of course, he set up a giant telescope and he started looking at the planets where he was out in the darkest corner of nowhere. And one of those planets had living beings, and he started observing them. And of course, those were us on Earth, in the darkest corner of creation, where Beelzebub himself is an enlightened being, who makes trips down to Earth to observe the strange and odd and weird behavior of what he called 3-brained beings, mind and heart and physical body. And that became a whole cosmology of this law of 3. And each of the 3 is composed of 3. And so that means that, we have a mental body and an emotional body and a physical body. And each of those bodies has, a mind and a heart and a physical part. So my mental body has a mental part of the mental body and an emotional part of the mental body and a physical part of the mental body. And the heart, the emotional body, has a mental part and an emotional part and a physical part, and the physical body has a mental part, an emotional part, and a physical part. And they all weave together and do specific types of functions that weave the intellectual and physical and emotional together. The law of 3 interplayed with the law of 7, which had to do with an octave of sound and music, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si thing. And I've touched on this a little bit before at one point in the past. It's extremely complex but mind-boggling. If you know anything about music, it is really astounding. This concept of the three bodies, the physical body and the physical body down here, and the emotional body and the mental body at the top, where food coming into your mouth to be eaten starts the dough of a do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si octave. And you swallow that food down into your stomach. It goes into the duodenum, which has more digestive enzymes. And it can't complete its digestive cycle unless it has an external energy source that pushes it over the edge to complete the mi-fa bridge. And the mi-fa bridge has got to do with the fact that that in the scale of music, when you look at a piano, like back there, my grand piano, you see that there are white keys and black keys, but there are gaps, right? You have 2 black keys, and then you have 3 black keys with a space where there's no black key, right? 2 black keys, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, all the way across the keyboard. And there are places where 2 white keys are together with no black key there. How come? How come there's no black key there? Why is there a gap? And that gap is called the mi-fa gap. Do, re, mi, gap, fa. Because in music, the scale of those keys on the keyboard are really strings that are tuned to very specific frequencies in relation to other keys. And there's a formula for that, which is the square root of 2. Here. This is the formula for the equal tempered scale. The 12th root of 2, or each note is exactly this much tuned higher than the note before. And every note on the piano basically represents a specific ratio of vibrational frequencies that fit nicely together, and we call that harmonics and harmonies and chords. But the notes between C and C sharp is the black key, and D, a white key, and D sharp, the next black key, right? C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, and then there's no black key. There's a white key, that's F. Then F sharp is, so how come there's no, E sharp or F flat, which is the black key? How come it's not there? Because it's a half note. It's a full tone, a full tone, a full tone, and a half tone. That's the mi-fa. And the same thing with C-do. When you get all the way up to the octave, the C and the do begins the next octave is no black key. So there's 2 semitone relationships within whole tones, mi-fa gap and the C-do gap. Nobody had ever heard this stuff before. And he directly applied this to nature and cosmology and your physical body and the 3 bodies and how they feed, and the concept that my physical body takes in one kind of food and my emotional body takes in another kind of food, and my mental body takes in another kind of food, and the food starts octaves, and the octaves go through do, re, mi with a mi-fa gap and all this stuff, all somehow arranged in this mind-blowing thing that nobody ever conceived of before. Was this esoteric stuff that he had brought back from these secret brotherhoods, where I start chewing food that starts the do of an octave, a physical octave, do, re, mi, and the mi-fa gap, where there's no black key, has to be bridged from an external energy source to complete it. If it doesn't, it won't complete. It'll go back and start a dough again. And that's why there's no straight lines in nature. Because a seed will push up through the soil and make a little stalk, and the seed in the soil is dough, and the ray is the stalk coming up, and the me is the first branch, but it can't go to the mi-fa, can't cross over the mi-fa bridge because there's no external energy source. It begins another dough, and that's why it splits off. And then each of these keeps going do, re, mi until it reaches the mi-fa bridge, and it splits off and starts a new dough on each side. So things go up and branch, and things go up and branch. They're branching because they can't keep moving forward because the mi-fa bridge doesn't work. It needs external energy source. So here in the digestive sequence, we start chewing the food, we swallow it down to our stomach, it goes into the duodenum. It can't go into the small intestine yet because it can't go to the next stage of digestion until the external energy source happens. And it comes automatically from my feeling center, my emotional body, when it starts feeding. And its feeding is perceptions. It's emotional reactions to things. That starts its dough. And it starts digesting that experience emotionally. And that dough is the energy that completes the mi-fa bridge, which starts completing the octave digestion sequence of the physical body. So food can be completely digested to rebuild my body. Meantime, the emotional body is starting its own octave of digesting an emotional experience, which goes to its do, re, mi. But it can't complete its digestion of emotions without an external energy source to boost the mi-fa gap. And that is from perceptions of myself existing in the mental body. But because very few people pay any attention to themselves existing, the mental body never gets fed, and the dough never begins, and the mi-fa gap in the emotional body never gets completed. So we end up with people who are mental sheep who look for somebody else to tell them what to do in society, and what to wear and what to buy and how to behave. And they become emotionally stunted because the emotional body never matures beyond a certain place, right? In some cases, you have the emotional development of a 3-year-old, but you're a CEO of a big company. Or you might be stunted at grade school or at an early high school level, and you never develop beyond that. Which means we have a whole society of people who are overfed in the physical realm and stunted in the emotional realm, and no self-realization ever takes place. This is what Gurdjieff called asleepness, spiritual asleepness. People who are automatons going through life, waking up in the morning with the alarm clock, racing around to get the kids to school, driving in a traffic jam to a job that doesn't pay enough money, who your boss has got the emotional development of a 3-year-old. Traffic jam home, running around to get dinner and homework and watching the news about the world burning, and tomorrow it's the alarm clock and back to work for the rest of your life until you die. That is a sleepness up here with no moments of self-awareness, no moments that I'm alive, no moments that I'm a cosmic being on the greatest journey of the universe to find the meaning of my soul. The world is job descriptions and names and titles and things like that. It's football and entertainment. That's your life. No depth. And he came with practical techniques for waking up to complete these cycles. Very specific exercises and things to do. The first fundamental law of the universe is the law of three forces, of three principles, or as it is often called, the law of three. According to this law, every action, every phenomenon in all worlds without exception is the result of a simultaneous action of three forces, the positive, the negative, and the neutralizing, which we see all around us, right? In electricity, you've got a positive and a negative and a ground. In the atom of the periodic table, we've got the proton, the electron, and the neutron, positive, negative, and neutralizing. In the body, we've got the same thing, the physical, emotional, and the mental, the three grand forces. And each three is broken into three, as I showed in that diagram, where the mental body has a mental part and an emotional part and a physical part. And here's an article that came out very recently, Bosons, Fermions, and Anyons. What are the three particle kingdoms in the quantum world? Here we are, the law of three. The totality of existence can be divided into three categories, each with a vital role in the structure of the universe. Every single particle fits into one of these three classes, or kingdoms, bosons, fermions, and anyons. The latter, just discovered in the past year. You can think of these groups as akin to the taxonomic tiers of organic life, each as different from the others as plants from animals and bacteria. Ancient secrets brought over back in the 20s that had been there for thousands of years are just now in the last year being discovered. I mean, He also talked about something called points of falling throughout the universe, or gravity. The fact that, I'm plastered to the ground with a certain level of force that, if I step on my bathroom scale, shows me how powerfully I'm falling towards the center of the earth. That at the center of the earth is a point of falling that attracts things to this point. And in this case, when the solar system was young and planets were first being formed out of the debris and the dust and all the other stuff that's flying around, it's all being attracted to various points of falling, which we might call micro-sized black holes. And as I've discussed before in previous live streams, the concept of black holes throughout the universe, including within the structure of each of the atoms in our own body, inside the proton of each atom of all the elements in the periodic table that make up these atoms that make up my body, make up the compounds. Inside each of those atoms, inside the proton of each atom, is a micro-miniaturized black hole that is attracting the particles together that make the proton, that makes the atom, that makes things spin around the nucleus in a certain way, just as you see stars spinning around the center of our galaxy. Same principle, same idea. Different size scale of supermassive black holes at the center of the galaxy, causing stars and planets to spin around. But the galaxy itself is spinning around something deeper at the center of the galactic group, where galaxies are spinning around a super massive black hole. And the black holes are spinning around deeper and deeper and deeper issues of black holes, points of falling, as Gurdjieff called it back in the 20s. But the mystery of these points of falling, the mystery of gravity, what is gravity, has endured. And even in classical physics and quantum physics, this has been an enduring problem. Currently, science considers reality to be made of the electromagnetic spectrum and its forces. That is divided into three primary forces. And that's the strong force and the weak force and the electromagnetic force. And the electromagnetism is all the electromagnetic frequency you see on the electromagnetic spectrum, where at one end we have radio and television, radio waves and television waves, and eventually we have X-rays and color frequencies and angstroms, and then we have gamma rays and cosmic rays and all these electromagnetic, and they're all made of atoms that are formed of, again, the law of three, which is positive, negative, and neutral in the atom, and sort of on and on and on it goes. And that explains just about everything except for gravity, the fourth force. General relativity by Einstein took on gravity and described gravity as bending of space-time, where the mass of an object, like a sun, is on a rubber trampoline and weighting it down, so the trampoline's got a dip in it, and then the planets are rolling around this dip. Except you have to imagine the trampoline is not two-dimensional surface that's dipped down. It's a three-dimensional surface that has got a dip in it. Kind of hard to imagine, but and we also have, so we're seeing that distortions of the shape of space-time is what relativity was all about. Einstein was looking upon space and time itself as the trampoline kind of thing, but not 2D, but in 3D, creating the points of falling that Gurdjieff had talked about that caused, movements in space where planets orbit around suns and suns orbit around the center of galaxies and galaxies orbit around larger central groups of points of falling and form grand galactic patterns throughout the universe. And time and space are modes by which we think and not conditions in which we live. So he was looking upon space and time as having no objective reality. And as quantum physics went further down sort of the rabbit hole, to a point where it is now, where science is now saying that there's no objective reality at all until consciousness arrives to witness something. So the universe is only potential to be something until consciousness is witnessing it. If consciousness has not arrived yet to witness, there is nothing there. There's only the potential to be something there. And this flies in the face of Newtonian physics, which, we've, as a society, believed to be so up to that point where quantum physics began to emerge, quantum mechanics, where in Newtonian physics there's an objective universe. Whether people are here or not, there are galaxies and planets and nebula and star systems, and rocks. And from a standpoint of quantum physics, that's not so. From a standpoint of quantum physics, there is the potential to be universes and planets and rocks, but not until somebody's there to witness it or experience it. Pretty profound stuff. But this goes right back to the Vedas and the Sutras of Patanjali and the I Ching and the most ancient texts on Earth. So now there's a continual movement afoot to reconcile gravity and the other three forces of electromagnetism, and nobody's been able to do it so far. The closest anybody is getting is something called quantum gravity, where general relativity, which was Einstein's description of of gravity, where space-time gets bent by mass, and then the other three forces of the strong force and the weak force, which govern how the forces inside the atom hold the nucleus and the electrons together. The strong and weak force hold the nucleus together and hold the electrons spinning around. And then the electromagnetic force that governs sort of everything. Those three forces, the law of three, can't be reconciled mathematically with the force of gravity as described by Einstein in general relativity. Both of those systems work quite well, but they need to be integrated for a grand unification theory. But general relativity is one of those most tested and confirmed scientific theories, and requires that there be an absolute beginning to all space, matter, time, and energy. It forces the concept of the Big Bang. You have to have a Big Bang for general relativity to work. And so we have this excellent understanding of what happened since the Big Bang, except for the first tiny fraction of a second. And of course, also, there's always the lingering question of, well, what was around before the Big Bang? Just everything just sort of show up from nothing, And interestingly enough, there is something called vacuum genesis, that there is the most infinitesimal possible mathematical probability that something could just pop out of nothing. It's a probability. It's unbelievably small. It's infinitesimally small. But when you have infinity and eternity of nothing, then the numbers are going to be in your favor for the most infinitesimal possibility to pop into existence, because it's got all of time to crunch those probabilities out. So when you've got eternity to wait for that infinitesimally small probability to actually take place, then it's assured. It will happen for sure. If you've got eternity to wait, then the smallest possible probability will always happen, sooner or later. But sooner or later has no meaning in infinity or eternity, so it's every possibility that you could have everything explode from nothing. As I've described before with the work of Terence Witt, where he described that there's simple nothing and there's infinitely complex nothing, where infinitely complex nothing is all the mathematical possibilities of nothing related to itself mathematically. Nothing plus nothing equals nothing, nothing times nothing equals nothing, right? Zero. And it turns out that these mathematical relationships of nothing to itself, even though it still equals nothing, those mathematical relationships themselves is something. And that's the something that pops out of nothing and creates all of this, which is nothing more than mathematical relationships of nothing to itself. This is what nothing looks like on that side of the equation of infinitely complex nothing. Simple nothing, without all the mathematical relationships, is, from a mathematical standpoint, what happens after you die. In other words, when you die, all that happens is the math disappears, and the simplest possible equation of nothing is nothing, and you don't have to go any further, where all of the things on this side of the equation of the infinitely complex relationship of nothing to itself collapses into nothing, and that nothing has as a seed all of these relationships within it. It's still there. All of this is still there, but it's just not expressed. But in the first minuscule amount of time of the Big Bang, it is believed that all the fundamental forces are unified into one grand force. The problem is that we haven't been able to figure out how this happens with gravity. We can unify electromagnetism and the strong and the weak nuclear forces using quantum mechanics, but we can't get gravity and quantum mechanics to mesh. We also don't expect to be able to get observations to help us do this, because the energy required to simulate this era of the universe is way too high for any current or foreseeable particle accelerator to study. So at this point, there is no possibility of direct observational verification of the quantum gravity era. This fact that we haven't figured out what happened in the first 10 to 43 seconds of the universe mean we can't say that the universe had an absolute beginning. This is the major argument against the Big Bang. And many of the math that spins out that points back to everything coalescing to some infinite spot where it started is only one interpretation of all the math and the data that we see currently in the universe. There are many other theories, Terence Witt and this concept of the zero thing is one of those, where there was no Big Bang, that is an eternal universe, because if the universe is made of nothing, nothing is eternal. It never had a beginning, it will never have an end, because it's not here. It doesn't exist. But within that non-existence of nothing, that's what this looks like. There would be no Big Bang, no beginning, and there would be no end to it from that standpoint. On the other hand, there are possibilities that and as we'll see today, there is the big expansion and the big crunch, and the big expansion and the big crunch. And that's another interpretation, that the universe expands and expands to a certain point, and then it starts to collapse down, and all coalesce into a super compressed single thing that compresses so hard of everything in the whole universe, compresses to a point where it explodes. And that's the Big Bang again. Explosion after explosion after explosion. After the expanded universe, it collapses and expands and collapses and expands. Variations of that are, it expands and collapses a bit, it expands and collapses a bit. And that's a sound wave. That's a sine wave. So it's very possible that the universe is an unimaginably gigantic ripple that represents a frequency. Something is vibrating, and this vibration is doing this thing. And each time it comes close, it creates an explosion. But from the standpoint of physics today, most scientists base all their mathematics on the fact that there was a Big Bang at some point, because all the math that they study seems to point there. But as I said before, what was before the Big Bang could have been a big collapse, or it could have been a big oscillation that continues forever. So the Big Bang really wasn't the beginning of all things. It's a recurring part of a massive vibration that is continually going, that continually creates and destroys and creates and destroys. And our universe is just one of an infinite number that have been going on since forever. And the more that we study all of this, the more we start to realize that the universe is like a quantum hologram. It's like a sort of a pixelated movie, and the 3D hyperdimensional movie whose resolution is the Planck scale, which you couldn't possibly see through. The resolution of pixels is so small that you could go forever looking for the bottom of it and never find it. So you can't see through this illusion of this movie. And it's information, because that's basically what a TV screen is with the little pixels. Little pixels are a translation of information. You're sending information of which ones turn on and off at what time in order to give you the illusion that there's a picture moving on your screen. And that gets us into really weird realms where they're trying to see that, because gravity seems to act like a wave, and everything else in quantum mechanics shows that there's a wave-particle duality of everything, that the waves are made of particles. And how those particles are going to be moving dictates the shape of the wave, and vice versa. It's like the chicken egg, it's like the yin yang. Neither one of them started the other. They're both in this steady state where they both, it's kind of like an ocean wave composed of an infinite number of water droplets. The water droplets in the ocean are not distinguishable. While they're part of the ocean, it all looks like a wave, but that wave is formed of an infinite number of water drops. Now, you could take you could take an eyedropper and you could pull one drop out of the ocean, so now you can see it. But once you drop it back in, it spreads out. It's still there, but you can't see it unless you have some special way of pulling it out with an eyedropper. And that's what they're attempting to do with these concepts of quantum gravity, figuring out how to stick an eyedropper into reality itself, into gravity, and pull a particle of gravity out. Right now, this new theory of loop quantum gravity, loop gravity combines general relativity, which governs gravity, and quantum theory, which governs the three forces, the weak and the strong and the electromagnetic force. But it leaves no room for space as we know it, only networks of loops that turn space-time into spin foam. Right? Down the rabbit hole we go. Spin foam, right? Where weaving space, the 3D structure of space in loop quantum gravity, can be visualized as a net of intersecting loops, as in this picture. This simple model was built by the author using key rings before spin networks and the physical significance of nodes were discovered. So this is kind of like string theory, except looped strings of gravity. And this is just an illustration. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole because it gets more and more and more complex the more scientists try to figure out what a way of reconciling gravity at the one end and all the math that describes it perfectly, and the other three forces at the other end, the electromagnetic force, and all of the sort of hoops they're jumping through to sort of kind of make that happen, or start to get absurd after a while. But essentially you end up with everything in the universe made from the three forces of electromagnetism and the strong and the weak force. And on the other hand, we've got this gravity thing, and we can't make them fit together in a unified theory. And my sort of take on that is the reason is because there's a missing a point here that also was brought over by Gurdjieff, and you see elucidated in the sacred literatures from the distant past. And that has to do with the fact that science still considers that the whole universe is made of the electromagnetic forces described by Einstein and described by quantum mechanics on the one end, relativity on the other end. And the electromagnetic forces of the electromagnetic scale, which is based on photons and the speed of light and M equals mc squared and all of that, is the whole universe. But in reality, that's not so. There's a yin yang in the universe, and one half of that is the electromagnetic world, and the other half of that is the world of sound, the world of vibrational frequencies. And sound, from this standpoint, doesn't have its own word. So what we consider to be sound is this pure energy force that has pressure moving through a medium at a certain frequency. And when the frequency is between 20 and 20,000 hertz, we call that sound because we can hear it. We've got a mechanism we invented for that little part of the scale. When it goes below 500 hertz down to 0.3 hertz, that range, we built another mechanism to feel that one. That's vibration, sense network, and posterior spinal cord and neurons in my brainstem that interpret those vibrational frequencies. But when we have frequencies below 0.3 hertz or above 20,000 hertz, where this mechanism and this mechanism are no longer able to interpret it, it's still there. We don't have a good name for it. They've reduced the sound world, or the mechanical vibration, mechanical energy waves moving through a medium world. They've attempted to break that down into quanta as well. So that's what the concept of a phonon is. And I devoted a whole live stream to phonons and the quantum physics of sound. So a phonon is the smallest particle of sound, as a photon is the smallest particle of light. And phonons and photons are the two grand forces of the yin yang that makes everything. And the phonon portion of that is not adequately recognized in science as its own force in the universe. It's still looked upon as something that is a result of the electromagnetic universe. Yet when we look deeper into that, we realize that it's most likely the other way around. That science is looking at it inside out and backwards, and the math can't work from that standpoint. And the secret of the beginning of an inkling of that is something I also discovered in a past, that I talked about in a past live stream. The concept of sonoluminescence. So in sonoluminescence, you have a spherical glass container filled with water with two transducers attached to it. And the tone coming out of each transducer is a very specific tone that is mathematically related to the radius of that sphere. That spherical container with water in it has a distance from one side to the other of its circle. Halfway down to the very center is the radius. So sound waves have size, as I discussed once before. Back on that piano back there, C sharp in the second octave has a sound wave that's 1 foot long. And C sharp 1 octave lower than that has 2 foot long sound wave. Or a 4 foot long sound wave an octave lower than that. And the higher you go in the octaves, the shorter those sound waves get by double, right? So a 1 foot sound wave in the second octave becomes a 6-inch sound wave at the third octave, a 3-inch sound wave at the fourth octave, and so on. So sound waves have size, and mechanical energy waves of pure energy also have size. And from the standpoint of an article that I talked about once before with gravity waves, where we have massive gravity waves that issued forth from a collision of two black holes a couple of years ago, which made huge news because now for the first time scientists could measure an actual gravity wave and ascertain a lot of new information about how the universe is structured. But these gravity waves are basically sort of like ripples in a pool. like a still pool of water. You drop a pebble in there, and we get these ripples, these circular ripples that come out. Those are waves, right? Circular waves that are coming out. And if you just blew that up to the size of the universe, that those waves, each wave would be going in unimaginable slow motion, right? Hundreds of thousands or millions of years for it to move. And the crest of these waves would be the size of, galaxies, massively gigantic waves moving out. And of course, the very first wave that ever happened would be from the Big Bang, right? A massive, unimaginable explosion that creates ripples in space-time that move out, but it's not a still pool of water with ripples. That's sort of like two-dimensional. This would be three-dimensional. It would be an explosion causing a spherical ripple. Spherical ripples moving out in all directions. Spherical ripples. And they're gigantic, right? That whole galaxies would ride on those ripples. And so therefore there was an experiment a few years ago where they showed the Andromeda galaxy that you're familiar with. It looks flat, but it's not. It's curved because it's riding on the crest of gravity waves. And if you could think of the whole universe as being a sort of a three-dimensional version of a massive still pool of water, instead of a still pool of water that's 2D, it's a three-dimensional pool of water that has a pebble dropping from another dimension into this pool, creating a spherical ripple pattern coming out. And now you've got a bunch of those dropping into the pool at the same time, and all those spherical ripple patterns are interacting with each other. Just like you see two pebbles drop into a pool of water, those ripples interact and creates cross patterns. And those cross patterns would be areas where the ripple summates with another ripple and gets larger, amplifies itself, and other ones that phase cancel each other out, where the ripple going up meets a ripple going down and they turn into nothing. Basically how phase cancellation headphones work. A sound wave of this size meets one that's coming under and they phase cancel. So that would be, as I've discussed before once, the formation of black holes and star patterns, because where they summate would be this similar kind of thing of sonoluminescence in the spherical container with water. When you tune these two frequencies correctly, so the size of that wave hits just at the center point and the two waves come towards each other and collide, that collision is a pressure wave that causes a bubble to form in the water. And the bubble expands out and collapses in what's called cavitation. And when it does that, the force of that collapse is unimaginably gigantic. Just in this little container, it's so huge, such an incredible amount of pressure that it forms a burst of light, a burst of photons coming out of sound waves. And the brightness is brighter than the sun, and the heat is hotter than the sun. They call it a star in a jar. And the bubble collapses in this cavitation event, and that explodes it, and it collapses and explodes and collapses and explodes and does this thing so rapidly that it looks like a steady star in a jar. And of course, the metaphor of sonoluminescence is the fluctuation of a continual forever Big Bang. The Big Bang itself could be a cavitation event of infinitely large sound waves in a larger continuum than we can even imagine. And those sound waves are crossing over and creating a summation cavitation event, and the cavitation collapse that causes the explosion is the Big Bang. And it expands and collapses, and it's this steady expansion, collapse, and forever. Never had a beginning, will never have an end, and this is what it looks like. So what was before a big bang was a big collapse forever in forces that are so gigantic it's impossible to conceive. And the force that's causing the explosion that creates the entire universe of electromagnetic forces, of photons arising from sound waves colliding together, creating cavitation, tracks with all the ancient literatures on the planet from every religion that we have. In the beginning was the word. In the beginning was the vibration, not the light. In the beginning was the word, and then there was light. And since the scientific community looks upon the universe as made of electromagnetic particles, and that's where everything comes from, and mechanical energy waves arise from the movement of electromagnetically created things that move and push and make that mechanical energy wave. That is true. But the electromagnetic frequencies themselves arose from sound first. And therefore, this concept of gravity is a primary force of the universe that, when it interacts with these waves, creates sonoluminescence events that are galactically large, or universally large. And therefore, when you start to look at it from that standpoint, everything begins to fall into place, where these infinite number of cavitation events create star systems and galaxies and big bangs throughout a continuum where big bangs are happening all over the place. An infinite number of big bangs all happening at once as ripple patterns move through a larger continuum that we can't even conceive of. And all of it has to do with information. It's information from the standpoint of, say, the Vedas, where these ancient Sanskrit literatures are talking about. At the core of what we recognize as the core of the quantum field, where you break particles apart, the smaller particles and smaller particles, and down at the bottom there's nothing. There's no more particles. It's just energy pattern relationships and the patterns are mathematical patterns of standing waves. That means that something is in a state of vibration there that we can't measure. It's too subtle. And from the standpoint of the Vedas, that's consciousness itself. And the ripples and the standing waves are an idea. It's information. What's the idea? This is the idea. All of this is the idea. And the localized particle of that idea is in you and me. Each of us has a particle of that idea within us, all separated out. And the idea within me is the idea of what I'm here to express. My path is an idea, a story. My story is an idea, a particle of the continuum of the massive idea of the mind of God, split into an infinite number of finite pieces of that idea. And each particle of that idea in the center of my soul is my compass, the compass to unfold my story, the story that expresses that idea. And that idea is the purpose of me, the purpose of my soul, the purpose of why I'm here, the purpose of what makes me unique, that I am here to discover. And I continually get hypnotized in a dreamlike state where I'm convinced that my life is ordinary. And I have to fight that. That's what I call entropy, that puts me to sleep and disseminates me into my component parts. And the force of life and consciousness and awareness fights against that, to push back against that and to assemble parts together and build something like a body or a soul or a meaning or a purpose in life. And those two great forces of the Yin Yang fight each other all the time. They're complementary and they're constantly one trying to tear things down, the other build things up. But at the core of all of it is information, an informational matrix that is mathematical. Where we might talk about quantum consciousness, where we attempt to go on the great heroic journey to find the meaning of spirit and the meaning of my soul in the space-time continuum, where the pull of the idea of who I am and why I'm here is my own quantum gravity itself. It's the point of falling, the thing that draws me, the thing that draws my heart, the thing that draws my heart on to choose this fork instead of this fork. This fork draws my soul, point of falling towards my purpose, draws me, but I can't figure out how that's going to work. This other way is the path of safety, and the path of asleepness, and the path of entropy, that if I need to wake up, I have to fight against that. I have to fight against the concept that I can achieve some level of safety outside the arms of the universe itself, who seeks to draw me, to give me a nice big hug and tell me it's all going to be okay. All you have to do is release that. I'm here to save you. I'm here to give you everything you need. Just surrender to me. Follow that. Let it go. Let me fold you in my arms. Let me take care of you. Let me show you that it's a loving universe that's here for you. All you have to do is release the fear. Surrender to the process. Take this fork, follow your heart, and all things will open to you. In China, in the I Ching, the most ancient text on earth, 5,000 years old, that discussion all has to do about the way of the superior man, as opposed to the inferior man who runs their life on fear and runs hither and yon, searching for safety, when there's no safety that can come from that, outside of the folded arms of the universe itself. So following the middle way, following the path of the soul and the heart, fearlessly, like the samurai, It's not that the samurai had no fear. They ignored the fear and jumped forward joyously with a shout into battle anyway. The grand yin yang of all things, where on one hand is electromagnetism, on the other hand is sound waves or mechanical energy waves, in an eternal dance of creating each other. Where we get photons, so here's a good one. Phonon is the quantum of sound. Phonon-guided biology. The architecture of life and conscious perception are mediated by toroidal coupling of phonons and photons and electron information. I know this is all very deep, this stuff. This thing called eigenfrequencies are basically a German word for standing waves. But recently, a novel biological principle revealing specific electromagnetic radiation frequencies that sustain life was presented to us on the basis of an evaluation of 175 biological articles concerning beneficial effects of electromagnetic waves on the state of living cells. Now, we know this is true because Tesla invented a device called high-frequency current therapy. And I use that in my clinic. The vibrational frequencies of the electromagnetic waves resonate the cells and wake them up for a healing response. But this idea that vibrational frequencies and electromagnetic frequencies form these torus structures, all based on sound and musical frequency relationships throughout the universe, where we form harmonic relationships between frequencies in massive, universally large scales of waves you might call it gravity waves, or these giant ripples in space-time. The ripples are a frequency, but the frequency is gigantic, but they still are octaves of scales that we can hear with our ears or feel with our bodies. That reach down into the microtubules in the neurons of your cells and deposit there as localized perceptions of reality within my own brain, and how I am perceiving reality itself in a sort of an internal quantum scale that's linked mathematically to the largest scales in the universe as a sort of a fractal hologram whose origin is sound, pure energy, interacting, creating light. And the light forms everything that we see and hear and taste and smell and touch. And as these electromagnetic forms interact with each other, they issue forth pure energy waveforms that arise from the electromagnetic field universe, which itself was created by sound waves. So sound waves create this, and this creates sound waves, and it all kind of cycles itself around together in sort of massive places within consciousness itself, who circles back into trying to understand all of this that consciousness itself is in the process of creating, moment by moment by moment, sort of entering into the grand yin yang of consciousness itself. Who came first, And nobody came first. It's been there forever. And anyway, with all of that craziness being said, let's just go for a direct experience and allow it all to let go and follow yourself into a place of rest and balance and sort of an opening. Headphones. And here we go. So, once again, that's where you can get this soundtrack for today. For those who are new, this soundtrack is up for 1 week. It's free. Make sure you download it and save it someplace, because the next week it will be gone, replaced by a new one, never to be seen again. And just as a note, next week, October 23rd, I began another 5-day intensive course for biotuning practitioners. So that weekend, Saturday and Sunday, I will be teaching this course. So this live stream will be moved to Monday, October 25th at 12:30, the usual time. The following week, October 30th and 31st, 31st is Halloween, I will also be teaching the second weekend of that course. So once again, this will be moved to a Monday, November 1st, All Saints Day. And the following week, November 7th, Sunday, we'll be back to Sunday as usual. So this next week and the week after will be on Monday instead. For those of you who follow me on Facebook, it's Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, and Instagram at Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, and YouTube. My YouTube channel is search for Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. You'll find me. Thank you all very much for being here, and next week I'll see you on Monday and not Sunday. So be good and be healthy and be safe, and we'll see you then.